And welcome to today's webinar, State Strategies for Financing CTE. My name is Andrea Zimmerman. I'm the State Policy Associate here at the National Association of State Directors for CTE. A little housekeeping before we begin. If you are looking for our PowerPoint after this webinar, it will be posted on our website, careertech.org, and we'll provide the URL at the end of the presentation. Also, if having any technical difficulties with audio, etc., please take advantage of the box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and Krista Hughes, who is our webinar host at Cisco, will be right there to help you with whatever you need. There will also be a recording of this webinar posted on our website as well, and Krista, that's your cue to start recording. And so I do want to give a special thanks to Krista for all of her help and for everyone there at Cisco for providing the platform for today. Also, a little bit of what we're going to talk about. First, we'll talk a little bit about context of why we're talking about financing for career and technical education. And then we're going to really spend most of our time today talking about the major findings of a new report from the National Center for Innovation in CTE that focuses on state financing for CTE, and also going to make it a little interactive for you today, and we're going to have some live polling questions. So definitely be watching for when we launch those 2 polling questions throughout the webinar, and we're going to be wanting to get some answers from you and some feedback on this really important topic. And finally, we'll have a Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. As questions come to you during the presentation, I encourage you to go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A box, also in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and I'll be filtering through those so that we'll have a really robust Q&A at the end of the presentation. I want to introduce our panelists. We will have the 2 authors of the report, Steve Klein. He's the director for the Center for Career and Adult Education and Workforce Development at RTI International, as well as the principal investigator for the National Center for Innovation in CTE. We'll also have Laura Rasmussen-Foster, the co-author. She's the program director also at RTI. And then the Conference of State Legislatures is co-hosting today's webinar with us here at NASDA CTEC, and Suzanne Holton from NCSL will join us. And with that, I want to segue into some background and context. We know that we're in an economy right now and in a world in which there seems to be an ever-shrinking pot of state and federal dollars for education and for many different efforts. And with that, the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act on the federal level has had those declining revenues as well since fiscal year 2010, when Title II was defunded, and that was a $100 million loss. And then in the following year, sequestration hit Perkins as well as many other federal programs. Fortunately for Perkins, those sequestration dollars have been refunded at about a 90% level. But this idea of financing is always ever present in every conversation we're having today. And that's why this report from focusing on state strategies for financing CTE is an important update to a 2001 report that RTI, then NPR, also put out. It was called Financing Vocational Education, a State Policymaker's Guide. And at the time, NASDA CTEC, our organization, to promote that report. And this time, for the 2014 report, we actually played a larger role in helping to put the survey out to the state directors of CTE and really help with the data collection that undergirded the entire report. With that, I would like to pass it to Suzanne Holton at NCSL to tell us a little bit of about why financing for CTE is so important also to the state legislatures. Suzanne?
Great. Thank you, Andrea. And as Andrea mentioned, I'm with the education program at the National Conference of State Legislatures. A little about NCSL. We are an instrumentality of all 50 states and territorial legislatures. We're a bipartisan organization that provides research, technical assistance, and opportunities for legislators and legislative staff to exchange ideas. And we are also an advocate on behalf of state legislatures before Congress. And we're very pleased to have Andrea and her team present at our national forum last month in Washington, D.C., where we hosted a session on career and technical education. And the session was so well received among our members, and so we are very excited to be partnering again with them on this webinar. The last few years, we have been seeing growing interest in states around career and technical education at the K-12 and post-secondary levels. And we see it as part of a greater trend among state legislatures around workforce development. We see 65% of jobs by the year 2020 will require some sort of education or training beyond high school. And most states are falling short of reaching their degree attainment goals till the middle and high-skilled jobs over the next 5 to 10 years. And as past workforce development initiatives have focused more on job search and placement, there's a growing need to mirror the shifting economy and focus on longer-term improvements to education and training. And CTE plays a crucial role in creating these bridges for students to obtain industry-recognized certificates and credentials in the middle to high-skilled fields. And of the CTE-related legislation that we've seen in the states recently, there's been a lot around aligning CTE programs with workforce needs, such as asking industries to partner with CTE programs in creating relevant experiences. So integrating CTE and dual enrollment programs so that students can start earning credits toward credentials while still enrolled in high school. And then also providing more opportunities for internships and apprenticeships so that students can gain real-world experiences. In order for state policymakers to look towards expanding or reforming their current CTE programs, it's important to understand how the programs are being financed and how states differ. So this is a great report from the National Center for Innovation in Career and Technical Education. And we at NCSL are excited to share this information with our members on this call today. So I will hand it back over to Andrea.
Thanks, Anne. Now I'm going to toss it over to Laura Rasmussen-Foster and Steve Klein to really start to dig in and tell us more about this report.
And this is Steve Klein. I'll start us off. And the first question, I guess, is, why are we here? And we know that CTE instruction is more expensive to provide than other forms of instructional services. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is shortly, but it's important to understand whether, and if so, how states are allocating their own funds, and by their own funds we mean the non-federal Perkins funds, to help offset the cost of providing technical education. So money matters. And we also know that there's been a increasing focus on competitive funding as a way of spurring innovation and incentivizing educators to embrace innovation. And the department's blueprint for transforming CTE references competitive allocations as a potential legislative reform, and performance-based funding is to be used in higher education and adult ed to allocate federal and or state resources. So as it was shared, the last study on CTE finance was conducted in 2001, and we know that things have evolved since that time. Furthermore, that study focused just on secondary CTE finance, and we could identify no recent study or studies that either focus on updating the secondary or specifically dedicated to state funding for post-secondary. And I should also say that cutbacks in state education budgets has implications for CTE in particular, because when we begin to see less funds available, providers can shift away from higher cost programs. And at the same time, as Suzanne mentioned, there's a focus on career readiness and preparing individuals for jobs, and particularly those middle skill jobs. So we felt it was time to update the report and draw attention to CTE financing, and it's really nice to see as we looked at the participants list that we have people from general assemblies, state legislatures, House of Representatives, so clearly reaching out to individuals who need to and should be aware of some of the issues around financing CTE. We also want to thank the NASD CTEC and NCSL for this opportunity. Information that we'll be sharing in this paper draws on data that were collected in a recently released NCI CTE report, State Strategies for Financing CTE. You can download an electronic copy of this report at the center website, which cecenter.ed.gov. I'll repeat that, it's ctecenter.ed.gov. We've also created an interactive report format to allow you to skim the key findings. We realize that sometimes you don't want to read a 100-page report. So we'll demo this page during the presentation, and I'll also add that for those of you who go and do want to download this presentation, you'll want to download it and save it as an Adobe file and then print it from a PDF, not from your browser, because the formatting won't work. So in terms of the cost of providing CTE, we've estimated that the magnitude of the additional cost of offering CTE varies, and it's roughly between 20 to 40% higher than those for academic instruction, although expenditures vary by program area and level of training. So the additional costs are due to several factors. One is the smaller class sizes used to deliver instruction, in particular because safety concerns, lab capacity often dictate smaller classes for instructors. And it seems counterintuitive to some people that this might be one of the largest reasons why costs are more expensive, because everyone immediately thinks of that second bullet, specialized equipment and supplies. And while it's true that equipment and supplies do cost more for career technical education, the reality is that when you have running smaller class sizes, you have to hire more teachers to serve the similar numbers of students. And because roughly 80% of the costs that you're facing in education are associated with labor, if you hire more instructors, you're going to be facing, to serve FTE students, you're going to face larger costs. And the other thing that we've been doing we'll have a study coming out for NCI CTE in the next couple months looking at schools and staffing survey data. And one of the things that we're seeing is that while CTE teachers may not be necessarily more expensive to hire in terms of their cost on a base salary, because they enter on usually a step scale, there are sometimes accommodations that have to be made for these individuals because in some cases they're on longer calendars, or we have to find ways of providing additional funding because they're often older. They're often, unlike an academic teacher who may come out of a college program with a D in English, for example, to really master the trade and understand what you're doing often takes years in the field. In addition to the class sizes and the equipment and supplies, it can also be more expensive to provide instruction in terms of just buildings and maintenance. You have utilities, you have to also build these classrooms. Now, it's often the case that school funding formulas and post-secondary formulas don't provide funding for facility construction. That's often done with bonds or other approaches, but it is still, on the whole, more expensive to provide CTE instruction, both, again, because of the class sizes and the need to hire instructors, the cost of the instructors, the specialized equipment and materials that you need, and then the utilities that you face in running those classrooms. So at this point, what we were going to do is turning it back, and we have a poll question for you.
Thanks, Steve. Excuse me. As Steve said, we're going to be doing a polling question. And so this is going to be appearing on the right-hand side of your screen. I'm going to go ahead and open the poll now as I walk you through it. You begin answering as I'm explaining. But you can see that there are the 4 questions there. The first question is a yes or no. Again, you can go ahead and start answering as you see. So the first one is, do you understand how your state funding formula works? Number 2, does it with state goals and priorities for CTE? 3, is it equitable? And number 4, align with state goals and, oh, I'm sorry. Well, you can see number 4. My screen keeps jumping around, but I'll go ahead and let you continue to answer. And as I see, folks, we have about 5% of you have finished, another 30 are in progress. And if this applies to you from your state perspective, please go ahead and answer. If you're coming maybe from an association, feel free to take whatever perspective you would like. But we look like we almost have everyone done, so I'll give you another few seconds to go ahead and finish. And go ahead and close the poll. You got 15 more seconds to finish submitting your response. And as these responses, the results pop up, I'm going to hand it back over to Laura, and she can kind of analyze the answers and go ahead and continue on with the presentation. Laura, can you see the responses there?
No.
Oh, let me try one more time.
I think they're appearing.
Okay.
Oh, great. So what I'm seeing here is that about 50% of the respondents do understand how your formula operates, which is great. For the other 50%, I can't promise that you'll understand by the end of this webinar, but hopefully we'll give you some tools for beginning to ask questions and exploring different ways that states are financing CTE. As far as alignment with state goals, it looks like for about 32% of you do see good alignment. 18% don't, and then 15% don't know. We had, kind of 5% who didn't answer. Whether equitable, it looks like 20% of you say no, 20% say yes, and then about 35% who didn't answer. And then it allowed locals to offer a good mix of program types, and 35% of respondents who said yes. So what are kind of key characteristics that we think about when we're talking about state finance for education, particularly with CTE? So whether or not a formula is transparent and easy to understand, what aligns with state goals and priorities so that funding is being targeted to those areas kind of importance to your state, whether it's equitable. So that regardless of the program mix you're offering, whether a LEA or post-secondary institution is located in a rural or urban area, whether you're a large program or a small program, you have a fair share at funding. Doesn't mean that everyone gets the same amount of funding, but that program is able to compete and or be eligible for the resources they need. And then the ability to offer a mix of program types, knowing that some programs are more expensive to offer than others, and hoping that funding can kind of offset the different costs of programming. So thank you for sharing with us, and we will certainly return to a polling question towards the end. So what we will now is spend a little bit of time going through at a high level what we found in our study and describe the different funding approaches that states are using to fund CTE at the secondary and post-secondary levels. We'll also show you how you can access the results in different ways. Hope that you can dive into more details after our discussion today. So as been noted, we gathered information for this report in a couple of different ways. Many of you here probably responded to the survey that was circulated last summer by NASD CTEC, asking secondary and post-secondary state directors to provide information about their CTE funding formulas. We then supplemented the survey results with a review of state websites, legislation, and published information on funding formulas. And in some cases, we could follow up phone conversations to clarify what we found online. So at the secondary level, what we found was that states are using different approaches to fund CTE, with a handful who are not allocating any dedicated resources towards CTE instruction. These states presumably provide additional resources within their state foundation formula, which local districts and community colleges can use to allocate towards CTE or other purposes as they choose. We find that at the secondary levels, the majority of states are providing some form of categorical funding for CTE instruction, either by directing funding to area CTE centers or funding LEAs or comprehensive high schools based on student enrollment or other characteristics. This was not the case, however, at the post-secondary level, where we found that very few states are providing categorical funding for CTE within their community or technical college systems. This is because CTE is seen as part of the overarching mission of post-secondary instruction, and therefore funded as part of state's overall basic aid for post-secondary education. By looking at the different approaches for distributing categorical CTE resources at the secondary level, state supported 3 approaches: student, unit-based, and cost-based. We'll go through these. At the secondary level, the majority of states use some type of a formula based on student enrollment in CTE coursework. As you see in this map here, we found 21 states using a student-based approach in the 2011-12 academic year. And just to note that that was the year of focus for the study. So when we're talking about the number of states and how CTE is being funded, we are referring to the 11-12 academic year. Base categories, we saw 3 different approaches used by states. The first is allocating resources in proportion to an LEA's relative share of the total CTE student population. For example, an LEA that serves 10% of the state's total CTE students would be 10% of the funds reserved for career technical education. Is to apply a supplemental weight within state foundational formulas or general funding formulas for K-12 education to account for students participating in CTE programs. These mathematically inflate the number of students participating in CTE coursework, thus generating more funds per student in CTE. So as a quick example, if regular FTE students are weighted at 1.0, it's possible that a CTE student might be weighted at 1.5. So you can see how enrollment in CTE would carry a greater weight in the same formula as students enrolled in regular instructional programs. And just a flat weight for CTE students, all programs are weighted at the same level to account for increased cost of offering CTE instruction overall. But in the third approach, states might differentiate weights based on program type or other factor. So this is still a weighting, but then within weighting for CTE, there might be different weights applied. For example, some states might choose to weight high-cost programs or programs that prepare students for high-demand careers at a higher rate than other programs. This approach attempts to account for the relative cost of offering certain CTE programs that may be more expensive due to class size or due to the need to purchase licensed equipment. So 3 types, kind of subcategories that we saw within student-based funding approaches. A form of financing employs unit-based approaches. And on 7 states that used a unit-based formula in the 11-12 academic year. Based formula, funds allocated based on a set of inputs that are used to deliver instruction or instructional units. Now for this approach is that it allows states to build in formula adjustments for programmatic factors that may contribute to making some programs more expensive to provide than other programming. These factors often include class size, teacher ratios, and others such as salary and benefits or materials and equipment. For example, one of the states that we looked at in the study identifies 37 different factors that are part of their unit calculation. And these factors include salary and benefits, both equipment and utility and maintenance expenses. The third to distributing categorical funding for CTE relates to cost reimbursement. Now 9 states using this approach to allocate resources. Approaches compensate districts for providing CTE services with compensation rates calculated based on prior year expenditures. Reimbursement funding is often dependent on the availability of state funds, meaning most states reimburse districts for only a percentage of their prior year expenses, and definitely true of all of the states using a cost reimbursement reimbursement approach in the 11-12 academic year. So states are reimbursing districts for total costs, but for a portion or a percentage of the cost from the previous year. And so the actual level at which is reimbursed, as well as the expenses that are eligible for reimbursement, really vary across states. And you can see some of the eligible expenditures listed here, and they can explore kind of in the report, kind of on a state-by-state case, what the different reimbursement rates are. At the secondary level, the majority of states are providing supplemental funding to offset the additional costs of CTE services, with 8 states not providing some form of categorical resources for CTE. 7 states are directing categorical resources, but just to area CTE centers. And so other CTE programming within these states, such as that offered by comprehensive high schools, is funded through the state foundational formula rather than through a separate funding formula for CTE. We've already discussed, of those states that are providing categorical resources, most are doing so based on the number of students enrolled in CTE students, the 21 CTE services. So turn to the online interactive version of this report and give you a sense of how you can actually dig deep into these results. Show my talk. Hopefully everyone can see the web. I'm going to make it full screen for everyone. And so here is on the National Center for Innovation in Career and Technical Education's homepage. And you can see a couple of different features here that you can revisit later if you're interested. One is the option to create a user account by registering at the top right-hand side, where you can save resources and other information to a personal account. You can connect with the center by social media. You see the Twitter feed scrolling along the bottom. And then also paying attention kind of here at the homepage to upcoming events and recently released publications. I'm going to jump and show you how to access the findings from this report. You can do so by clicking on our research. You see it here on the screen in the scrolling marquee, but there's no guarantee that that will live there forever. So that is to go through our research. You can see the reports that have been published and are in progress for the center on this page. And here's the state strategies for financing career and technical education, where you can download the full report or enter the interactive version. From here, hopefully, as we click through the K-12 categorical funding, you'll recognize this map. And trying to review the findings in this way, it gives you the chance to look at the whole picture, or the complete map, if you will, as opposed to reading the category by category in the report, which we also recommend as well. But from here, you can look at this map and kind of decide how you want to enter, whether it's through an individual state or by category. So if we were going to look at student-based formulas, the version of the map that we shared in our PowerPoint, an option to click on a state to learn more about their approach. And you see here the 3 different types of student-based funding: the proportional allocations, weighted allocations, and differential weighting. So I'm going to click on Wyoming as an example. You click on Wyoming, and you see here you get information about the weight that is applied in the state's funding formula, a description of the weighted method, and kind of information about where the weight is applied. We encourage you to come visit this page, kind of click through, look at other states are funding CTE, kind of think, are there particular regional differences? Are there what are states that are either the same size or located near you doing? And so this gives you a chance to enter the report in this way. You can do the same if you were to choose, for example, unit-based formulas. You can see here across states in the Southeast using unit-based and cost-based as well. You see where these states are located. And again, clicking on Oklahoma can get more information about each of these state approaches. So return to our PowerPoint. Give you a step. And so we haven't talked much about post-secondary funding for CTE yet. And here you can see that the majority of states are funding CTE services at community and technical colleges through their foundational or basic state formulas. So for which we could collect information as part of this study, you'll see 3 states are not providing separate funding for CTE instruction at the post-secondary level. I'm not distinguishing between CTE and other forms of instruction in their formulas. We did see and did find that 7 states are providing categorical resources to area CTE centers at the post-secondary level or to post-secondary institutions. They're using either student-based or youth-based formulas. So similar to kind of the descriptions of each of those types for secondary, you see that then translated at the post-secondary level. And so review these state approaches on our interactive report. So I'll show you where those are located by sharing the site again. And so you click on the left-hand navigation bar here, you'll pull up the map for post-secondary. So we had mentioned 7 states, 2 providing funding to CTE centers, which include instruction for post-secondary CTE, and then you see here 2 using a student-based formula and 3 using a unit-based approach. And again, you click on the state, you get information. So I've done Texas here, and it talks about describe how the state allocates funds to community colleges. In this case, the unit-based is with contact hours by instructional program type. All right, we're going to shift gears. We've given you kind of a high-level overview of what we know about states' approaches for financing CTE at the secondary and post-secondary level, and hopefully use the tools to dig deeper as you're interested. So we're going to switch gears now and talk about another topic of the report. But before doing so, I wanted to see, check the chat box. I don't see any questions coming in, but if you do have questions, please feel free to stop us, and I know we'll have a dedicated Q&A towards the end. States' use of competitive funding approaches includes performance-based funding, in which local providers receive fiscal awards for meeting state-established performance benchmarks. In other words, PBF is a means for targeting resources to high-performing providers. And as mentioned, we are seeing an increasing use of performance-based funding strategies in higher education and in adult education. Another is the use of pay-for-success models, in which private funds are initially invested in public programs and repaid by government agencies if the programs achieve a measurable set of performance goals, usually with the ultimate goal of reducing the future demand for public services. And the survey findings related to competitive funding, I do invite any states who use approaches or considering these approaches to share experiences in the chat box. And we also will be calling on a couple of states who we've already talked with about this approach. The report is that only a handful of states are using performance-based funding approaches in CTE. And they do use performance-based funding, use it to allocate both federal and state resources at the secondary level and just state resources at the post-secondary level. And we found that states are using a variety of federal and other performance measures to determine performance-based funding allocations, including completion, credential attainment, and placement rates, as well as graduation rates, credit accumulation. And we know from previous research on performance-based funding that there are different ways to measure and reward performance. So some might be looking at the number of outcomes rated by each provider, especially as compared to the total number of outcomes for the state. And other states might be looking at performance as it relates to a particular benchmark or performance target for the state. So looking at rates of performance. The survey, our DC Tech survey, states gave a number of reasons for not adopting PBF and CTE to date, with the most popular just being a lack of support at the state level, that state leaders have not raised PBF as an approach yet. We heard that some states have adopted performance-based funding information on how it works and on the benefits and drawbacks of this approach. And then other states in that they weren't using performance-based funding yet for CTE had started exploring it at the state level. So it's not a place they would check yes on the survey yet for its use, but certainly getting closer. And you can explore more about what found in the study on states' use of performance-based funding in career and technical education on the interactive report, the left-hand navigation menu, and to look at performance-based funding. So I wanted to stop and ask one of our states their experience using performance-based funding in career and technical education, in particular, kind of what you see as kind of the benefits and the drawbacks of using it. So are you connected by phone? You can share by chat if you want to just give us a kind of a sentence or two that talks a little bit, tells us about how Wyoming is using performance-based funding and kind of experience has been, and I can share that chat.
Use *6 to unmute your phone.
Oh, Dennis isn't there. How about Connie? Are you there? And can you talk a little bit about Kansas? If you're not connected by phone, please feel free to use the chat function as well.
Hey.
Oh, great, Connie. How are you?
Great. Yes, I used *6. I was hoping it would work. So I can touch base on a couple of things. As you saw on the map, Kansas does use the cost-based model, and we use what we call tiered and non-tiered funding or courses, and we have a rubric. We're actually in the process of kind of redefining what that looks like due to some courses being in there that maybe shouldn't have been in the first place, and in the whole concept of sustainability of career and ed funds. So, but tell a little bit about the performance funding. A year ago, obviously the legislature, our board, this is always a topic of discussion, and currently our board is looking even toward the universities, which, you know, is a big step in making them a little nervous. A year ago, we implemented a program or project that we called Outcome Metrics. And so we asked institutions, first of all, we determined several programs that are aligned in our state. So that means that they have to have a certain set of core courses that are unique to they're sent to each program. So in that manner, those programs are pretty much similar. We ask institutions, all of our 26 community and technical colleges, if they would like to participate in this pilot program. That we have 11 institutions that volunteered, a total of 32 programs that spanned 14 program areas. And that was everything from welding to auto body, diesel tech, dental hygiene, auto therapist, nursing, and a lot of those things. So more along the allied health and the manufacturing fields, HVAC, and so on. And so we then worked to determine 3 metrics to grade or to measure this institution's performance on. And so that was credentials earned, the salary, and the number of graduates who exited and were employed. So we have our first results back from last year because we had to wait for the Department of Labor data match. And we've used some funding to kind of initially reward those people volunteering those programs, then to incentivize them at the end of that. We also are in the process right now of offering small grants for the institutions to submit an improvement plan that they want to implement at their institution to improve whatever metric didn't make it. And what we see coming in is very positive. It has to do with the follow-up process at their institution. But I'll tell you that the one metric that we're probably having the most difficulty with and maybe the most conversation about is the salaries. And I know many other states deal with this in that the demographics and the primary geographics of the state of Kansas vary so much from the metropolitan to the very, very rural area that it's hard to set a wage metric that that people are okay with. And we actually ended up setting it at 95% of the state average, which almost included every program when we set that. We had some not make it, and it, you know, it's for institutions to do anything about that, the wage of those graduates, especially if they're graduating and staying in those small rural communities. So through the competitive grant program, where we're going to provide some technical assistance and assist those institutions, we hope to provide some additional help in looking at a broader area for those graduates, and maybe additional career counseling, some additional follow-up strategies, and that type of thing.
It's really helpful to hear kind of from a state what this looks like. I mean, we're providing you all with a very high-level overview and perhaps risking oversimplifying this for this topic. As you can hear from what's happening in Kansas, that there are a lot of different considerations and a lot of, you know, good, careful analysis that's going into planning. So thank you. It's really helpful to hear from you.
Thank you.
And then just quickly summarize kind of a couple of other findings related to competitive funding, and then we'll have another poll. So we found in terms of pay for success is that there aren't any states who respond to our survey who are using pay for success models for career and technical education. We heard from at least 3 states who were aware of the use of these models in other educational contexts in their states, but not for career and technical education. But the response, however, did express interest in learning more about how these models might be applied in career technical education. And even though, as we saw in the previous slide, that there are only a handful of states using PBF in career and technical education, almost half of the survey respondents expressed interest in using performance-based funding to allocate a portion of federal Perkins resources. So we heard from states that there's certainly interest in using performance-based funding and learning more. And on that note, approximately 2/3 of the respondents indicated that they would need training on performance-based funding formula development and implementation should it be required by the legislation. So we're going to follow that conversation of the 3rd bullet and hear from you on what support you might need if you were to consider adopting performance-based funding in your state. So let me just back to Andrea.
I appreciate it. You can just pass the controls back to me. All right. So I'm going to do the second of our live polling questions. And I'm going to go ahead and open the poll now for you. Again, as I'm speaking, you can be answering, and you're supposed to check all the replies. But what training activities would be helpful for building a PBF formula? Mark all that apply: national or regional workshop, one assistance, examine other state formulas, online training manuals, or materials, excuse me, or so again, that about you have started, 30 have finished. Again, anyone who hasn't started, you have another maybe seconds to go ahead and get started. Right. So 20 seconds. We're going to closing the poll. You have a few more seconds to go ahead and submit your responses. I am sharing those results, Laura, with you. And can you see them?
Well, there's some pretty close versus, but 48% of respondents said that examples of other state formulas would be helpful. 45% of respondents would be interested in a national or a regional workshop, and 4% who said that online training materials would be helpful. So great, and we'll have to compare kind of what we hear from you today in this poll to kind of the survey responses and see kind of where there are needs for training around performance-based funding. So thank you for your responses.
All right, thanks, Laura. So now we would like to say 2 questions, and we want to hear from you. A couple of you have already submitted questions, and as we have additional questions coming in, please send them. Use the chat box if you can so that all of the panelists and attendees can see the question and so that we can answer it. With that, one of the first questions we had come across, this is Laura and Steve. This is Matt Black, and he's saying that although he realizes it's not the focus of the report, did you as the authors look at what might be considered an adequate amount of funding per student for CTE?
Question. I'll start off, and Laura, certainly feel free to jump in. We did not look at, we didn't get at adequacy, and I think that that's one of the challenges is when we have states that don't necessarily have specific standards. We know that there are good career technical education standards that state directors came out with, but when we don't have specificity in terms of some of the approaches, you can. I used to say sometimes, you could teach this with the cutting edge technology, or you could teach CTE using MacGyver, a paper clip, and a spool of thread. So you really need to be thinking about what level within your state is appropriate, and also be thinking about how do you be most efficient, and that would include thinking about leveraging either area schools, community colleges, employers, and in the programs of study, so that we don't have to replicate services across states. But we didn't tackle the question of what is an appropriate amount to spend. Nor did, as Laura mentioned, there's introductory coursework, there's more advanced, they can get very complicated. So ours was, our approach here was to more profile what we were seeing and allow you, we've heard from states, they want to know what others are spending, they like to know how states are, their neighbors and others are allocating funds. And in some cases, we know there are some states that only have foundational funding and like to have information so that when they're considering their own funding formulas, they have at least some options to consider.
Very much. Okay, now another question that we had, this comes from Indiana, where there's a performance-based funding initiative in the legislature, and one of them from Indiana is looking for some input from other states. Now, I know Connie gave us a little bit of information, and although Dennis wasn't able to actually speak, could either of you speak to me?
To interrupt, Dennis has been moved into the panelist list, and all attendees were unmuted. Dennis, can you speak?
Yeah. Can.
Okay.
Hi.
This is Hardin from Missouri. We have what we call an effectiveness index formula, and this for quite a number of years. Our goal is to reward our approved CTE programs based on positive placement and completers. We have $5 million that we provide for our area career centers through our incentive formula, effectiveness index formula, and $1 million for comprehensive high schools. Basically, our EIF, we call it the EIF effectiveness index formula, based on placement and enrollment. These are placement data that we collect for Perkins based on, it's a 80-day follow-up, and it's based on our Perkins definition of 3 or more credits in a sequence in an approved CTE program. And they fall into one of 3 categories: continuing education in a related field, becoming employed in a related field, or they enlist in the military. 7% of our formula is driven by placement, and the remaining 10% uses enrollment data, which is an unduplicated count of students enrolled in an approved CTE program. So, like I said, we've had this for years. Like every other state, we're kind of starting to have discussions about our funding CTE in our state, and we're looking, the question if placement's really a good indicator for CTE, secondary program success, because we're looking more for kids to go on for continuing education and such. But it seems to work for now, and it's a nice incentive for our schools, and we'll continue to take a look at it and see what works best for us.
Thanks, Dennis. And could you speak to what are some of the greatest challenges for trying to find the appropriate the appropriate mark for and everything as you went through this?
I would probably, if I understand the questions you're asking, on the placement piece, again, it's the 180 days out from the CTE program. So got a lot of discussion around, because that may be a challenge, because that's not really that far out from when they leave high school. So is it a real solid measure at that particular point in time?
Great. Thank you. That's exactly what I was asking. Okay, we also have another question here, and I'll throw it to you, Dennis, if possible. Someone here is very interested in knowing what the percentage, what the correct percentage of PF is and how to walk it. So is there a sweet spot when you're looking at enrollment-based versus performance funding? And Connie, if you want to join in too as well, this is a question coming from Indiana.
For Missouri, we have $50 million in state general revenue for current technical education. $1 million, 98% goes out locally. This particular piece, the incentive piece, is only $5 million out of that $50 million pot of funding. The other amount that goes out is through salary reimbursement. We have a percentage that we approve for a salary, although we're froze out on that currently. But really, overall, in our bigger CTE pot of money, it's fairly minimal, but it is a good incentive for the schools. The other piece that we do, which is if we have some dollars that remain unspent in our state funding, do roll it out through the EIF. So some of the schools do get some additional money if we have anything left in some of our other categories of funding, like our vocational technical enhancement grant program.
We have one question that just came in, and this will be the last question before we go ahead and wrap up. And that is, someone is wanting to know, was there by chance any calculation of an average amount or perhaps adequate amount of CTE funding per student?
Oh.
Or I know.
Steve spoke at one a little bit, kind of, that we really were just profiling. We did collect information from states on how much money they are allocating as categorical resources for CTE, and all of that information is available kind of in the state-by-state layout on the interactive report. But, I do caution that what we didn't collect outside of the survey is kind of the bigger picture, the context, kind of how much money is going out in support of secondary and post-secondary education in general, how are decisions being made, how is the formula created, whether it was legislatively mandated or, created with input from the field. So there's a lot of kind of context that's needed when you kind of look at the numbers and the amount of money, being able to look at the magnitude of resources being directed towards CTE. But no, as Steve had mentioned, there was not look at average or adequate amount of funding for students.
Steve here. I just wanted to also tack on that, because there was also asked about the funding formulas tend to be complicated. Are there any simple ones? And the short answer on that is they are complicated. And we don't have the years that they've been in place, and in some cases, even though we categorize these formulas into one area or another, in some cases they can even have pieces of, like, so for example, a unit component or a student-based component with another component associated. So the best thing to do really would be to look through the tables. If you download the report or electronically, there are links. So if there's a state that you're very interested in, you can go to the first source and get directly from there. But fortunately, these formulas are very, very complicated in some cases, and as the poll showed, not everybody knows exactly how they operate, and you got to think of that as a problem if you're putting money out in a way and people in the field don't know how they work.
Thank you so much, Steve, Laura, and for everyone who submitted questions. So we have more information. Laura, actually, would you like to go ahead and talk a little bit about, I know you showed us on the website, but just remind us one more time where they can find the report and all the interactive aspects.
Absolutely. So the interactive report it's linked here. So when you do get to see a copy of the PowerPoint, you should be able to link to it directly. But as I showed you, if you get to the National Center for Innovation and Career and Technical Education, we set the URL via chat. You can kind of via the research link, our research, find this report. And then I wanted to mention, too, that all the information that's in that interactive report is also available in the appendix to the report. So the series of matrices organized by funding approach, so the student-based, unit-based, and based approaches with all that same information. So it's easy to look at it, whether you want to look at it kind of state by state in the interactive report or funding approach in the matrix. And that also is available from the National Center for Innovation CTE website. And there's been a lot of interest around performance-based funding, and I just wanted to you all to a series of tutorials on performance-based funding that RTI International created. And they walk you through the steps, kind of what are some of the big decisions you need to make when you're considering performance-based funding at the state level, what are the steps in performance-based funding formula development, and then once you've implemented performance-based funding, kind of what do you need to do on a fairly regular basis to make sure that your formula is certainly kind of achieving your desired effect. So the link here is embedded as well, and you find this from RTI's website. We'll send around that link. So
the link has just been posted in the chat as well.
Great.
Thanks so much. And just to go back a slide, as we mentioned at the top of the presentation, this recording and the slides will be posted. The slides are already posted, and the recording will be posted soon at our website, NASDA CTEC's website, careertech.org/webinars. We have a few other things. We want to thank you so much for your attention today and your great questions and all your interest in this topic. We here at NASDA CTEC do have regular webinars, and we'd like to invite you to two that we have upcoming. One is on February 5th, and that is the 2014 State CTE Policy Review. In conjunction with the Association for Career and Technical Education, we are publishing a review of all the 50 states and the major CTE-related policies that happen both through legislatures and executive orders and state boards of education. And so as you're heading into opening the new sessions of the state legislatures, this is probably a really great touch point for all of you to see what the other states are doing and to learn a little bit more. Second, I have another webinar on February 10th, and that is focusing on employer engagement, another topic that is becoming more and more important every day, it seems. And this is actually an outgrowth of a report that we published in December. It was the State of CTE, Employer Engagement in Career and Technical Education. And this report is also available on our website. We encourage you to check it, where we surveyed the states to kind of understand the landscape, understand more how and in what ways states are engaging with employers to further advance and align CTE. And with that, we will be focusing on 2 states in particular, Kansas as well as Alabama, to learn really on boots on how is it working in the states, what are they doing, what did they do, et cetera. And so we invite you to join us for both of the webinars. You can register for them also through that link, careertech.org/webinars. And also we have a spring meeting for anyone who may be interested and is in Washington, D.C. in April and like to join us. That registration actually went live just a few minutes before this webinar. And so again, you can learn more about that on our website. Also, the National Center has a training that may be very useful for a CTE community. It's an online training to learn more about CTE consortia. And again, you can find that at ctecenter.ed.gov. Finally, a big thanks to panelists and a big thanks to our webinar host, Krista. And you can contact all of us here at our emails. We thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you. Have a great day. Goodbye.